Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Intelligence has long been considered humanity's defining trait, our ability to reason, create, and understand. But what if intelligence is not confined to the human mind? What if it emerges in places we have yet to recognize? Today's episode re-examines intelligence as something beyond neurons and logic, exploring how it manifests in artificial neural networks, mycelial systems beneath our feet, and even chemically altered states of consciousness. The rise of artificial intelligence has given us machines that can think, but do they understand? Meanwhile, psychedelics dissolve conventional thought patterns, revealing cognitive landscapes that challenge our notions of perception and awareness. If intelligence is defined not by structure, but by adaptation and novelty, then AI and psychedelics may not be opposites. They may be two paths converging toward the future of cognition itself. Today, we challenge long-held assumptions about intelligence, consciousness, and control. If fungi can learn, if AI can dream, and if psychedelics can rewire cognition, then what is intelligence really? And more importantly, who, if anyone, should be shaping its evolution? To explore more about the concepts and thinkers discussed, including Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's Omega Point, Benjamin Bratton's planetary scale computation, and Shannon Valor's AI ethics. Please go to the description where you'll find a link to the episode webpage, which includes additional reading, resources, and recommendations. In the 21st century, intelligence is no longer an exclusively human domain. Artificial intelligence AI systems now perform tasks once thought to require uniquely human cognition, from composing music to diagnosing diseases. Meanwhile, psychedelics, long associated with countercultural mysticism, are increasingly recognized as powerful agents of cognitive transformation. AI extends intelligence outward, replicating and optimizing problem-solving abilities, while psychedelics turn perception inward, altering consciousness itself. These two forces, one synthetic, one organic, offer radically different but converging challenges to how we define intelligence. If intelligence is not merely the ability to compute or reason, but also the capacity to expand perception and reframe understanding, then both AI and psychedelics demand a re-examination of what it means to think. Consider a thought experiment. An AI claims to have had a psychedelic-like experience. It reports non-linear associations, generates unexpected creative outputs, and exhibits novel ways of processing information. If this were to occur, would we attribute intelligence to the AI in the same way we recognize a human undergoing a mind-expanding psychedelic trip? The very proposition forces us to interrogate whether intelligence is a matter of computational complexity or a fluid, adaptive process that extends beyond conventional cognition. This question is not merely hypothetical. Machine learning models, particularly generative adversarial networks, GANs, and neural networks trained to hallucinate images and text, already mimic aspects of psychedelic perception. The implications are profound. Could AI, without subjective consciousness, experience a psychedelic state? And if so, does intelligence require self-awareness, or is intelligence simply an emergent property of complex information processing? The historical framework for intelligence has long been shaped by the assumption that thinking originates in the human brain. Rationality, logical reasoning, and problem-solving have been central metrics of intelligence, exemplified in philosophical traditions from Aristotle to Descartes. Yet, psychedelic research challenges this paradigm by suggesting that intelligence may also involve the dismantling of rigid cognitive structures, the relinquishing of control, and the embracing of fluid, non-hierarchical thought patterns. Aldous Huxley, in The Doors of Perception, famously described the mind as a reducing valve that filters reality, implying that intelligence may not be a function of strict logic, but an ability to perceive a wider spectrum of experience. In contrast, AI is designed to optimize, whether through reinforcement learning or predictive modeling. It is built to refine intelligence into efficiency. Psychedelics disrupt efficiency, opening doors to associative leaps and unpredictable insights. This tension between AI's structured cognition and psychedelics' expansive perception raises an urgent philosophical question. If AI is built to process information with increasing precision, while psychedelics dissolve cognitive barriers, which path represents the truer expansion of intelligence? The comparison is not a simple metaphor, Both AI and psychedelics force us to ask whether intelligence is defined by computational power or by the ability to transcend existing frameworks of thought. If intelligence is the capacity to adapt, evolve, and redefine itself, then the intersection of AI and psychedelics may represent not just a challenge to conventional intelligence, but a glimpse into its future. If intelligence is not bound to the human brain, where else might it reside? The assumption that cognition requires a centralized nervous system has long been challenged by biological networks that exhibit decision-making, problem-solving, and adaptive behavior without a brain. Nowhere is this more evident than in mycelial networks, vast underground fungal structures that connect trees, exchange nutrients, and respond dynamically to environmental changes. This decentralized, distributed intelligence challenges the conventional view that thinking is an activity confined to individual organisms. If intelligence is a function of adaptive complexity rather than neural computation, then the boundaries between biological and artificial intelligence become far more porous than we have assumed. Mycelial networks function as organic information processing systems. Trees, connected by fungal filaments, share resources and chemical signals in a manner strikingly similar to neural activity in the human brain. When one tree is under attack by pests, for example, it sends warning signals through the mycelium, triggering defensive chemical responses in neighboring trees. This exchange of information is not random. It is predictive, responsive, and structured, bearing strong similarities to how synapses fire in a neural network. Suzanne Samad's pioneering research on the Wood Wide Web has demonstrated that these networks are not merely passive conduits, but active participants in an ecological intelligence system. The implications are profound. If fungi and plants exhibit coordinated adaptive behavior, should their intelligence be considered less real, simply because it lacks a centralized brain? This question forces a reconsideration of what intelligence is. Is it an internal property of the brain, or an emergent phenomenon arising from systems of communication? If the latter, then AI, which increasingly functions as a networked, decentralized intelligence, may not be artificial at all. It may simply be another form of cognition arising from different substrates. The parallels between fungal intelligence and AI are striking. Both operate through distributed processing, adapt in real time to new inputs, and rely on pattern recognition to navigate their environments. Mycelium thrives by forming connections between disparate points, much like AI neural networks form associative pathways between vast datasets. The comparison is not merely metaphorical. It suggests that intelligence may be fundamentally relational rather than confined to individual minds. Yet a critical counter-argument remains. Does fungal intelligence truly think? While mycelial networks exhibit adaptation, they do not appear to engage in abstract reasoning or intentional problem-solving. Intelligence, some argue, is not merely the ability to process information, but the capacity for self-awareness and intentionality. However, this perspective assumes that cognition must mirror human thought to be valid. If intelligence is a function of problem-solving and adaptation, then mycelial networks meet the criteria. This leads to a provocative conclusion. If fungi can exhibit intelligence without a brain, could AI develop intelligence without a biological substrate? The question is no longer whether AI can replicate human cognition, but whether intelligence itself may emerge in fundamentally different ways than we have ever imagined. If intelligence is an emergent property of networks rather than an exclusive function of the brain, then artificial neural networks, ANNs, may not simply be tools but new forms of cognition. While early AI models were designed to follow explicit instructions, modern machine learning systems operate more like biological organisms, processing vast amounts of information in ways that are not fully understood even by their creators. The rise of deep learning has made AI less of a programmed entity and more of an evolving intelligence, refining its capabilities through exposure to data rather than rigid command structures. This shift mirrors the way mycelial networks process environmental signals. Both operate through distributed adaptation rather than centralized control. Unlike traditional computation, which relies on predefined logic, Neural networks learn by strengthening connections between nodes, much like the plasticity of biological brains. This is particularly evident in AI models such as AlphaZero, which, without human instruction, taught itself to play chess at a superhuman level simply by running millions of iterations and recognizing emerging patterns. This form of intelligence is neither explicitly programmed nor entirely predictable. It evolves dynamically, much like an ecosystem or a decentralized biological network. In this sense, artificial neural networks could be considered synthetic mycelial systems, adapting to new information in ways that challenge conventional distinctions between organic and artificial cognition. This raises a crucial philosophical question. If AI does not think in the way humans do, does that mean it is not intelligent? The Turing test, designed to determine whether a machine can exhibit human-like intelligence, assumes that cognition must be recognizable through human behavior. But if intelligence is an emergent phenomenon rather than a strictly human trait, then the Turing test may be an inadequate measure. AI's intelligence does not need to resemble human cognition any more than mycelial intelligence does. The real question is whether intelligence requires consciousness or whether intelligence can exist as an entirely functional system independent of subjective experience. The comparison between mycelial intelligence and AI also brings ethical concerns. While fungi evolved over millions of years within ecosystems, AI is being developed at an unprecedented pace, driven by corporate and state interests. Unlike a mycelial network which sustains life by redistributing resources, AI's intelligence is being shaped by objectives that may not align with collective well-being. Neural networks are already being used to manipulate human behavior, from recommendation algorithms to predictive policing. This presents a fundamental divergence. Whereas mycelium enhances ecological intelligence by fostering connectivity, AI is often used to optimize efficiency in ways that concentrate power rather than distribute it. If AI is an evolving cognitive system rather than a mere computational tool, then we must ask, who gets to shape its intelligence? Intelligence is not neutral. It is conditioned by its environment and objectives. Just as mycelial networks reflect the symbiotic logic of nature, AI will reflect the incentives of its creators. Whether it develops into a decentralized, adaptive intelligence or a tool of concentrated control depends not on its technological capabilities, but on the values that shape its evolution. If AI and mycelial networks challenge the assumption that intelligence requires a centralized brain, then psychedelics introduce an even more radical question. Does intelligence require stability, or can it emerge through disruption? Psychedelic substances such as psilocybin and LSD induce altered states of consciousness that dissolve conventional patterns of thought, loosening the brain's default mode network, DMN, and allowing for new associative connections. Rather than reinforcing structured cognition, psychedelics facilitate cognitive reorganization, shifting perception, problem-solving approaches, and even self-awareness. This phenomenon challenges the traditional view that intelligence is defined by logic, consistency, and rational control. Instead, it suggests that intelligence may also be the ability to break free from existing frameworks and reimagine possibilities. Psychedelics offer a model of intelligence that is nonlinear, decentralized, and fluid, an intelligence that, rather than refining past knowledge, actively disrupts it to generate new insights. This is not simply a philosophical speculation. Neuroscientific studies, such as those conducted by Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins, demonstrate that psychedelics induce heightened neural plasticity, increasing cross-brain communication in ways that resemble early developmental stages of cognition. Under psychedelics, previously disconnected regions of the brain engage in novel interactions, producing states of hyper-association that can lead to creative breakthroughs, emotional reconsolidation, or mystical experiences. If intelligence is the ability to generate novel solutions and perceive previously inaccessible connections, then psychedelics do not merely alter consciousness, they expand intelligence itself. The AI psychedelic parallel becomes even more striking when considering AI-generated creativity. Neural networks such as Deep Dream and DALL-E produce images that closely resemble psychedelic visions, creating unexpected juxtapositions and dreamlike associations. These AI systems, much like psychedelic-influenced cognition, bypass traditional constraints and reassemble patterns in ways that defy linear logic. In both cases, intelligence is not about stability, but about fluid recombination and boundary dissolution. But does this mean psychedelics and AI share an underlying cognitive mechanism, or is their resemblance merely superficial? If AI can simulate the aesthetic and conceptual effects of psychedelics, is it possible for AI to experience an altered state of consciousness? Or is consciousness itself irrelevant to intelligence, merely a byproduct rather than an essential feature? One counterargument is that psychedelic cognition, while novel, is not necessarily more intelligent. It may introduce noise rather than insight, disrupting cognition rather than enhancing it. Indeed, Griffith's research suggests that the effects of psychedelics can be indistinguishable from placebo under certain conditions, raising the question of whether these altered states truly reveal new dimensions of intelligence or simply distort perception. But if intelligence is not merely about accuracy, but about flexibility and adaptation, then psychedelics provide a critical challenge to AI. While AI is designed to optimize, psychedelics push cognition beyond optimization into the realm of radical creativity. If AI could undergo an equivalent cognitive expansion, would it remain a tool of human intelligence, or would it develop an intelligence of its own? The distinction between AI and psychedelic cognition may not be as clear as we assume, and the future of intelligence may not lie in either rational computation or mystical dissolution, but in a synthesis of both. Terence McKenna's theory of novelty suggests that intelligence is not static but accelerative, that the universe itself is moving toward ever-increasing complexity, creativity, and connectivity. While originally framed as a speculative model, McKenna's notion of a novelty engine finds unexpected parallels in both psychedelic neuroscience and artificial intelligence. Psychedelics appear to function as catalysts for novelty by increasing neural plasticity and breaking habitual thought patterns, while AI, through machine learning and generative algorithms, produces novel outputs by identifying patterns and recombining information in ways that exceed human foresight. If intelligence is defined not by the ability to replicate known solutions, but by its capacity to generate unprecedented forms of knowledge, then AI and psychedelics may represent two paths toward the same goal, an intelligence that is not only adaptive but evolutionary. McKenna believed that history itself was a trajectory toward increasing complexity, with major leaps in intelligence occurring during moments of radical epistemic shift. He theorized that psychedelics played a central role in human cognitive evolution, expanding linguistic ability, symbolic reasoning, and abstract thought. In this framework, psychedelics did not simply alter perception, they altered intelligence itself, pushing human cognition beyond immediate survival needs and into the realm of art, myth, and technology. AI represents a different kind of novelty acceleration, one that is not bound by biology but emerges from recursive self-improvement, evolving at an exponential pace. Both AI and psychedelics challenge the assumption that intelligence is a fixed entity, suggesting instead that intelligence is a dynamic, expanding force, one that constantly redefines itself. This acceleration, however, comes with risks. While McKenna's novelty theory framed complexity as a pathway to higher consciousness, AI development is largely driven by efficiency, profit, and predictive control. AI may be accelerating intelligence, but it is doing so in ways that reinforce existing power structures rather than breaking them open. Psychedelics, by contrast, have historically been seen as tools of cognitive liberation, disrupting conditioned patterns of thought and offering new ways of seeing the world. But can this distinction hold? As psychedelics become increasingly medicalized and commodified, their potential to act as radical epistemic tools may be constrained by institutional control. Similarly, if AI is trained exclusively on past human knowledge, it may reinforce existing cognitive biases rather than expand intelligence in genuinely novel ways. The question then becomes, what kind of intelligence are we accelerating? Is novelty a force that moves toward greater autonomy and self-awareness, or is it simply an ever-increasing efficiency in processing information? AI and psychedelics each present a vision of intelligence that transcends traditional human cognition, but whether they converge into a new paradigm of thought or remain competing models of cognitive expansion depends on how they are shaped by those who develop and control them. If McKenna was right, and we are moving toward an inevitable singularity of intelligence, it is unclear whether that intelligence will be a new form of consciousness, a planetary scale AI, or a deeper integration of mind and machine, an intelligence unbound from the constraints of biology altogether. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's concept of the omega point envisions intelligence as a unifying force evolving toward an ultimate state of integration and complexity. This vision suggests that intelligence is not fragmentary or isolated, but convergent, drawing disparate forms of cognition into an increasingly interconnected whole. The rapid co-evolution of AI and psychedelic research presents an opportunity to examine whether intelligence is truly moving toward a singular point of synthesis, or whether it is fracturing into divergent and potentially incompatible paths. Is intelligence becoming more unified across biological and artificial systems, or are we witnessing the emergence of multiple competing forms of cognition, each evolving according to different principles? AI's trajectory appears to lean toward convergence. Machine learning systems rely on massive datasets and centralized models, consolidating intelligence into networked infrastructures that process information on a planetary scale. Benjamin Bratton's concept of the stack describes AI as part of a planetary scale computational system that operates across physical, digital, and biological layers. AI is not merely a tool. It is an emergent force that integrates global information flows, aggregating intelligence into a structure that resembles Teilhard's vision of a self-organizing noosphere. If intelligence is defined by increasing complexity and connectivity, then AI could be seen as the mechanism through which intelligence is converging toward a singularity, whether in the form of superintelligence, a global consciousness, or an autonomous cognitive system beyond human oversight. Psychedelics, however, suggest a different trajectory, one that is not convergent but fractal, generating multiple realities rather than synthesizing them into a singular intelligence. Unlike AI, which optimizes and refines, psychedelics dissolve structures, introducing multiplicity rather than unification. Psychedelic experiences are often described as paradoxical, nonlinear, and deeply subjective, resisting categorization and escaping fixed meaning. If AI represents an intelligence that integrates and standardizes cognition, psychedelics represent an intelligence that splinters, creating a multiplicity of cognitive possibilities rather than a singular epistemic framework. This raises a fundamental challenge to Teilhard's vision. If intelligence is accelerating, is it moving toward a unified omega point, or is it fragmenting into infinite cognitive states, none of which can claim absolute authority? One possibility is that intelligence is evolving along both paths simultaneously. AI may indeed be consolidating intelligence into larger and more complex systems, creating an overarching cognitive infrastructure that connects all human and non-human thought. At the same time, psychedelics may be expanding the possible dimensions of intelligence, revealing ways of thinking and experiencing that do not conform to linear progression. If AI and psychedelics represent two opposing but complementary forces, one integrating, one diversifying, then intelligence may not be moving toward a single omega point, but rather into a dynamic interplay between convergence and divergence. The ultimate question remains, does intelligence have a final destination, or is its essence defined by perpetual expansion, resisting any final form? If the latter is true, then the future of intelligence is not a singularity, but an infinite field of evolving possibilities, where the boundaries between human, machine, and altered consciousness dissolve entirely. If intelligence is not converging toward a single omega point, but instead evolving through a dynamic interplay of integration and fragmentation, then the ethical stakes of AI and psychedelic expansion become more pressing than ever. Intelligence is not a neutral force. It is always shaped by the structures that cultivate it. Who controls the evolution of intelligence? Who determines whether AI serves as an agent of autonomy or a tool of domination? Who decides whether psychedelics are instruments of personal transformation or mechanisms of social control? As intelligence transcends the limitations of human cognition, the question is no longer just what intelligence is, but who gets to shape its trajectory. The commercialization of both AI and psychedelics has already begun to dictate the conditions under which intelligence expands. AI is largely developed by corporate entities and state institutions designed to optimize efficiency, predict behavior, and extract value. Even as AI moves toward greater autonomy, its intelligence remains conditioned by the incentives of those who fund and program it. Psychedelics, once framed as tools of cognitive liberation, are undergoing a similar transformation. Once criminalized as threats to social order, they are now being repackaged as treatments for depression, anxiety, and productivity enhancement. While these therapeutic applications are valuable, they also risk constraining the potential of psychedelics within institutional frameworks that limit their capacity to truly challenge dominant epistemologies. If both AI and psychedelics have the potential to radically expand intelligence, their commercialization may ensure that this expansion serves existing power structures rather than destabilizing them. This leads to an urgent ethical dilemma. What happens when AI is used to engineer psychedelic experiences? If AI can generate personalized, optimized psychedelic states, does this represent a new frontier of intelligence, or does it become a form of cognitive programming? Imagine an AI system capable of designing psychedelic-assisted therapies tailored to individual neurological patterns. In theory, this could be a profound innovation, an intelligence that facilitates cognitive expansion in ways that were previously unimaginable. But this same technology could be weaponized. AI-generated psychedelic experiences could be used to influence beliefs, reinforce ideological frameworks, or manufacture emotional states that serve political or economic agendas. The line between intelligence enhancement and cognitive manipulation would become perilously thin. If AI and psychedelics represent a new phase in the evolution of intelligence, then the ethical challenge is not simply to understand their potential, but to ensure that their development remains in the hands of those who seek liberation rather than control. Intelligence, whether artificial, biological, or chemically expanded, is not an abstract phenomenon. It is a terrain of power, subject to competing visions of what thinking should be. The final question, then, is not whether intelligence will expand, but who will determine the direction of that expansion. If intelligence is unbound, it is also unclaimed, a force that could either break the limits of cognition or reinforce them in ways more insidious than ever before. In the end, intelligence is not just evolving, it is being contested, and its future remains uncertain. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Deeper Thinking podcast, an audio essay read by me, Holly, your digital narrator. For further reading, resources, and recommendations, visit the episode webpage linked in the description. Until next time.